there might be people with more connections than me. There might be people with more experience than me. There might be people like, who have more money than me. Might be more people who have more privilege than me. But my work ethic and willingness to do whatever it takes as far as like, going to certain places or, doing the work, staying up all night and, doing my editing, doing the writing, that's what separates the good from the great. I'm no stranger.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Trash, and stand back for another video. This time, I'm joined by Lyric from the Maps and Graps podcast. So welcome to the show.
Hi, happy to be here.
So if we take this back to the very beginning, before any of your work within the media, where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan?
We go back to October 9th, 2006. I am home. It is a school night. I am watching wrestling Monday Night Raw for the very first time. They are in my hometown, and there are family members in attendance. I didn't go to the show. I simply watched to see if I could find them in the crowd. But that's back when 3-hour Raws were like a special thing. 3 hours later, I forget all about them and I just get hooked into the crazy world of wrestling. And so that was what this year makes 18 years. So that's where it all started for me. But I feel like as a wrestling fan, I've had like tons of rebirths as a wrestling fan
Yeah.
as I like find new promotions and styles and things that I like. But that's how it all got started back in 2006.
So when your family announce or family members announce, we're going to this show, did you have any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like pre-knowledge of what wrestling was, for lack of a better word?
Kind of, but I just wasn't interested. That was also a really 2006 was a very interesting year for me because that's when I got into sports as a whole. So I got into basketball, NBA basketball at the time as well. And so that was like second grade for me. So I was super young.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, so I didn't really know what it was. That's also why I didn't go to the show. I remember I was asked if I wanted a ticket, and I was just like, I don't think I like wrestling. So I
Oh,
stayed home.
okay.
I know it ended up being a Raw family reunion episode, so they were bringing back like legends, and it was just they were getting ready for Cyber Sunday. That's back when they had the three brand split with ECW. So yeah, it just kind of clicked for me.
So when you look back now, if you had a DeLorean and you talk about it clicking for you that night, would you
Mhm.
say to yourself, you're going to that show?
No, just because like I think like everything happens for a reason. And I think like I needed to experience it that night. Like I like the wrestling origin story that I have. Like I like being able to trace it to one day, one moment. And I don't and honestly, I think that at that age, had I been like live in the crowd, just being a kid, I don't think I would have like been able to process a lot what's happening. Like just because like there's no commentary when you're at a live show. I
Yeah,
had never been to a live show before. Probably would have been like sensory overload. So I think everything happens for a reason, so I wouldn't change it.
I know exactly what you're saying there. So when you do get hooked on wrestling, and you mentioned there was three brands of WWE at that time, and there was TNA at that time,
Yeah.
really TNA at that time, but other than that, they were the two main big promotions. So
Mhm.
what was like your consumption of wrestling once you discover it? Are you someone that's all in? Do you have a specific show you watch? What's your consumption like?
I was watching everything that WWE put out at the time, and I got into TNA very soon afterwards. So like the whole Spike era of TNA, um, I pretty much watched and I loved it. I go back even now as a fan to that time and look back pretty fondly. Um, but like I said, I was a kid, so I didn't have any money. So a lot of the pay-per-views and stuff like I missed because like I just couldn't afford it.
Yeah,
Uh, but I would just take whatever I could get. Like I remember at CVS, which is a drugstore here, they would have like outdated magazines at the end of the month. Like they would have like this buggy full of outdated magazines at the end of the month. That would be marked like 50 to 60% off. And so I would buy a WWE magazine from there. Like every single month to get it like super for the cheap and like take the posters out of it and like put it on the wall, like that famous Ring Generals poster. I had that on my wall probably until I was like what, 17. Um, like I had the bedspread, and I think I knew it was going to stick because I stayed into it. Like by high school, I'm like still super into it,
Yeah.
and everybody else is like falling out of it. But like by then, I knew my wrestling taste had started to change. A lot of the stuff on the main roster just didn't really appeal to me, but I loved NXT. So I got my first job at a grocery store, and I would cash my check every month. I didn't even have a bank account yet. I cash my check every week actually, and I would go to Walmart and I would buy these 3-month gift certificates for the WWE Network because I didn't have
Yeah.
a account, and so that was how I watched like NXT, the Mae Young Classic, Cruiserweight Classic, and like I liked that type of stuff, and so like as we obviously as time goes by, like I realized like I loved more alternative and international brands of wrestling, but that was basically how it all shaped growing
What
up.
was what was your thoughts on, and I am curious to know about this. You talked about different styles of wrestling you liked. What was your thoughts on WWE's version of ECW at that time? Obviously, knowing what ECW is now, because I'm assuming you've gone back and watched it. What was your thoughts on WWE's version of ECW?
So it wasn't my favorite at the time, and that was me at like what, 8. But I think a lot of it was I didn't even get to watch ECW live half the time because it would come on so late.
Mm.
So I would, and obviously like being a kid in school at the time, so I didn't get to watch it live, so I would watch it on the rewatch. And like too a lot of it didn't appeal to me, but like at that point, like I loved wrestling so much, like I just want whatever was available, I was watching. But looking back now, like it was garbage. It
Mm.
was so garbage, and you can always tell it felt lesser in the moment, even back then, but it definitely like no terrible.
You talked about there looking back now. Is there a moment from your early fandom that you're like, how the hell did I like this sort of thing?
Um, a lot of it. I think as especially like now, I'm not like anti-sports entertainment, but it's not my bread and butter. As a
Mm.
wrestling fan, I don't really care for like I don't really watch WWE regularly now. Like I really like DDT over in Japan. I think that they do sports entertainment very well. But like now I'm so a much more of a hardcore wrestling fan. So a lot of like the gimmicky stuff, a part of my childhood. Like I think I look back on it fondly from a nostalgia point of view, but like with current wrestling fan lyric sit down and watch this and like care about it, probably not. No.
Mm. I understand what you're saying completely there. So you talked about your current fandom and your fandom changing a lot since childhood. Where before we get into your work with the media, where is your current fandom as we sit here in January of 2024?
Oh, I love just about any and everything that's really wrestling focused. I recently, this past year, I've got to travel all over the world experiencing different styles of wrestling, and it was absolutely incredible. And I really love British wrestling. I love Japanese wrestling.
He was
Uh,
in Japan this past week as we record
yeah,
this, correct?
yeah, and it was amazing. And I got to see so many different types of styles. So, like seeing All Japan, which is a bit more of a conservative style. And then I saw DDT, which is like this wacky sports entertainment stuff. And I saw Noah, which is kind of almost that conservative style. You have New Japan, which is like this big grand spectacle, but very hot, very big on strong style, Stardom, best women's wrestling in the world, emphasis on presentation. So I got to see just about so many different ranges of things. I love Japanese wrestling. When it comes to American wrestling, AEW is my primary
Hmm.
promotion that I keep up with, AEW Ring of Honor. And so that's really Me for right now, this year, I would love to like break in more into lucha. I would love
Mm.
to go to Mexico. Arena Mexico is one of my big venue goals. I've been to Wembley, I've been to the Tokyo Dome now, and so Arena Mexico is definitely on my bucket list for sure.
I had this question written down for later, but you talked about your bucket list as a fan when it comes to 2024. What are some of your bucket lists as a content creator? Who would you like to work with? What sites would you like to work with? And things like that.
You know what? I don't have too many more things on my bucket list because I really crossed a lot of them out last year. Um, I said I wanted to, it's really interesting. So the bucket list, it's kind of almost a term. So last year, I just when I really decided to go all in on this wrestling thing, I turned 25 last year on February 21st, and I said for 1 year, I'm going to give this thing all that I have. And if
Mm.
by the end of 365 days I have nothing to show for it, I'll just go back to being normal to like or whatever normal was for me. Um, but if it does show some types of promise, I think I'll keep going. And so I threw everything that I had at the wall as far
Mm.
as like, traveling, as far as like reaching out to people. I remember going into last year, I wanted to interview Mariah May. I wanted to interview Rocky Romero. Like that was on, number one for me. And I did a lot of those things. So like of course, like I would love to like interview like my faves like Kenny Omega and like a Mercedes or something like that. But truly, I really want to work on my Japanese. I really want to
Mm.
work on my Japanese and I want to be
As
able
in
to
the language. Yeah, yeah.
absolutely, yeah. I want to be able to do more translation work on my own end. And that's because that is something that I will say that I struggle with off in Japan. I had some great people around, who were very helpful, and like I had my translation apps, which were really helpful as well.
Mm.
But I would like to be able to have that knowledge for myself, because Japan is really big for me, and I honestly just want to continue to like shed a light on things that people aren't always talking about. Like I said, like last year, I really enjoyed covering British wrestling. I want to continue to do that, and interviewing talent from that side of the world. I really enjoyed any chances that I got to interact with talent from Japan, but also talent here in the US, like specifically women and Black performers. I would love to continue to shed a light on them. And also like what is another goal for me? Another goal for me is honestly to do more collaboration work like within the space with other
Mm.
content creators, specifically more women, more Black creators, because I feel like this space is quickly diversifying and
Mm.
there's a lot of things that need, I think, a spotlight that don't always get it.
Who are some creators that might be small right now, but you think at the end of 2024, you talked about this space needing more, uh, might be huge at the end of this year as we record this?
Oh, there's so many. So if I don't say your name, charge it to my head and not my heart. But I think All Elite Keeks is amazing. Um, I really like the way that she breaks down content on her show. For people who might not even watch AEW, but they like her, so they'll listen to what she has to say. And so it's all about informing the audience, which I really respect, because I think a lot of times, like in the content creation space, a lot of people are looking for clicks and views. And so they might say something negative to try to get like over. And like she's not like that at all. So I think she's absolutely fantastic. I love Charlie and Alexia and Anna over at Wrestle Purist. I've really bonded with them. They're all around my age. And so the younger gals in this space, we always we tend to stick together, and so
Yeah.
they great for me. And they also do great work, and I love like I just love like how they bring such a feminine but educated perspective on wrestling, specifically a lot more of like the alternative hardcore brands. Um, who else? Yeah, when I say there's so many, there's literally so many, but definitely wanted to give a shout out to those people.
That's very, very cool. I was trying to find a segue, but that's something I need to improve on as an interviewer. I'm not gonna lie. I do apologize. But what you talked about giving yourself a year last year to be like, if this isn't successful, I'm gonna go get a shoot or real job. So where did that inspiration come from to be like, I want to try this thing and I'm gonna give myself a year to try this thing?
So I do have a shoot slash real job. It's just, yeah. um,
Fair, fair.
yeah. Um, it's just my job isn't like my passion right now.
Mm,
Um, but it pays the bills and the people are really nice if anybody's listening. Um, but wrestling has always been like my thing, my jam. But I've always like growing up, I was a huge overachiever. Huge
mhm,
overachiever. So like top of the class, honor rolls, student council, chorus, marching band, National Honor Society, like you name it, I did it. And then I went to college and then like I was a first generation college graduate and I did everything. Student government, I gave a TED talk, I went to the Forbes Under 30 Summit, like was
wow.
super accomplished. And so coming, I actually went to school with the intentions of working in wrestling. So I have a degree in sport and
Mhm,
entertainment management from the number one sports science institution in the country, here, the US.
mm,
But midway through it, there at the time, WWE was the only game in town. And I would look on their internship roster of the people that they were taking, and they would never take anybody like me. It would always be like white kids, and well, I mean, which is fine, but like I would always apply, and I would never, so like I got really discouraged around that time
mm,
about the wrestling thing. And while that was happening, in the midst of me being discouraged, and this is around, I would say 2017, 2018, while I'm being discouraged, I'm also like getting into other stuff. So like I really started getting heavily involved in student activism on campus, which eventually turns into politics. So I kind of like take a detour. And so by the time like 2019 rolls around, and AEW pops up, which I'm really excited for, but at the same time, I'm working on student government campaigns. I am starting to travel for the first time, and doing a whole bunch of different stuff. And so I kind of get distracted from wrestling and like I really kind of like veer off of that path. I was at that point just finishing my coursework because I didn't want to change my major and like graduate late.
mm,
Uh, so, and also I felt like in my program at the time, there wasn't a lot of support for what I wanted to do specifically,
mm,
let alone any support for like somebody like me as in a Black woman really looking to like explore the bounds of like what women, specifically women of color, has our position in like the sport and entertainment industry has specifically been typically been. And so kind of get like off path for a while, and like I start working political campaigns and stuff, which I was actually really good at, and like I still have roots in occasionally now, even though I don't really care for politics anymore. But that was really kind of how it happened. But then I remember after around, what was that? That was 2022.
mm,
I've already graduated college, and I in the midst of a pandemic, and my mental health was like garbage. And I
mm.
remember I was super depressed during 2022, like super, super, super depressed, where I wouldn't do anything for hours for days at a time. I would just sit in a dark room. And I rediscovered wrestling around that time. Specifically AEW and specifically New Japan. And I remember I would just spend hours and hours and hours watching footage of old Puro, just hours and hours and hours of stuff. Um, and that was really kind of how I healed myself. And in addition to going to therapy and stuff. And so wrestling has always been a grounding thing for me, even when I was a
Yeah,
kid, and even when I was a child. And so like as an adult, it ended up being the thing that I really feel like saved my life. So I knew I wanted to leave the political slash the political space. I Even though I was good at it, I don't think it was good for me.
it
Um,
wasn't your passion by the sound of it either.
yeah. And like
Yeah.
I've always been a leader. I've always been a leader literally since like kindergarten, always been in leadership roles. Responsibility isn't anything new to me, but just I as I get older, I realize that just because I'm good at something doesn't mean I need to be doing it.
Hmm.
And so when I originally started doing the wrestling traveling, I went to my first pay-per-view, which was Full Gear 22. I loved it. And then next
Ooh,
month I go to Final Battle 22. FTR Briscoes happens. 3. And I just remember I wasn't even supposed to be there. Like I wasn't even supposed to be there that day. I was like I said, super depressed, and my therapist recommended that I should go be around friends. And so one of my best friends had just moved to Dallas because I like that was also what was happening at the time. All of the people closest to me had just moved away. So I went
what
to
for
Dallas to visit.
school?
Yeah, well, after school. So like
Right, I get you.
everybody,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Sorry, I
after,
interrupted you there.
yeah. So I went to school in my hometown, but my hometown is in everybody else's hometown. So like it's a college town, but I'm like the only one of my friend group that still lives here. Um, even though it's the biggest school in our state. So people were coming. No, I went to Dallas, and I remember I went for FTR Briscoes 3. It was great. It was amazing. It was awesome.
Phenomenal match.
Absolutely. And that's my second pay-per-view ever. And then a month later, Jay Briscoe passes away.
Mm.
And I just reflected on being there for his, his last Ring of Honor match. Nobody knew at the time. And I'm just like, that doesn't feel like a coincidence to me. And like of just like, of me being there, at that time, and it just the way that he lived his life, and that was when the wheels start turning of like, okay, maybe I should pick the wrestling thing back up. Like I never gave it a proper go because I got kind of like really discouraged and like I never really put everything into it. But now I have like I have a skill set and I have all these tools. Like I feel like I kind of maybe sort of know what I'm doing now by the next month. Then like my birthday comes and I make this pact myself, and then a month later I head off to London for spring break,
Mm.
and then I see my first Rev Pro show, and then from that starts like this crazy travel journey between March of 2023 up until like last week.
Yeah.
And so that's really how I kind of get into it as in the content creator space. I had told myself no for a long time. So we're looking at about 6 years before I actually started.
Mm. What would you say to anyone that is like has told themselves no when it comes to content creating for a long time? What would you say to anyone that is in the position you was in pre-starting your journey?
I would say do your thing. Like literally do your thing. And I think that the passion that you have for what your thing is will shine through. I think that don't worry, like when I create stuff, I don't create looking for clicks or engagement. Don't get me wrong, those things are great and obviously you need them to a certain extent, but I remember how it was because like I need an anchor, and
Mm.
I think that and I needed something to make me smile, something to make me feel. Like I will never forget the way that I felt watching a Shibata versus Okada match of just
Ooh.
making it makes me feel, and as long as you're making people feel something, and it doesn't have to be negative, you don't have to spew hate. Like I think that you can accomplish just as much by aggressively loving something as you do aggressively hating it. And also, I don't think that enjoy all wrestling is a myth.
Mm.
I think that you should be aware of all wrestling. You should know what else exists, and I think you should try all wrestling. So I think you should give everything a try.
Mm.
But you're not going to enjoy all wrestling. And if you do say you enjoy all wrestling, 9 times out of 10 you're lying. So I think that you should find what you like And I think a lot of times as content creators, everybody's trying to rush to get this, and they want to get signed here. So they're just like, oh, I'm going to cover everything. I want to make myself as multi-talented as possible, which is great in a certain extent, but make sure you're covering things you like. You're
Mm.
talking about things that you like. And I think that for me, when I got started, I realized that I don't really watch WWE anymore. Obviously it's super popular, but I don't watch it anymore, and I know it's not my taste anymore. So if I report on this every week, it's going to come off as if I'm like doom posting, and I'm not going to be putting my best self forward
Yeah.
by covering something I don't like. Just how like I recommend, there's a lot of people I know, great WWE content creators who are like, I don't really care for AEW like that. Don't cover it. Like I genuinely think that, like, do what works for you, makes you happy. Like if your favorite type of wrestling is like Joshi wrestling from like the early 2000s, if that's your niche, run with it. Like if you like backyard lucha libre, run with it. If you like, gritty brick rest, run with it. If you like, old school stampede wrestling, territory stuff, like run with it. Like there's so many different options there, but find what works for you and just let your passion shine through.
That's very, very cool. I sort of ping pong on my interviews, and that's just how my brain works. I do apologize for that.
Oh
But
no, you're fine.
what would you say to Lyric at the start of her wrestling media journey at the beginning of 2023? What would you say to her now when it comes to content creating? But also, what do you think she would think of everything you've accomplished at this point?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I
I
would
love
say
that response, by the way.
I I think first I would say that I would just tell her that bigger. Like your thoughts then of where you'll go, who you'll be, like they seem huge, but like you're gonna go so much bigger. I wish you saved a bit more money on the way.
Mm.
um, but you're gonna go so much bigger, and I think that she would be proud, but she wouldn't be surprised also. Like I said, I've been an overachiever my entire life. And so anything that I do, I'm going to do it big. And it's not because I come from money, because I don't. I'm a first generation college student. I've always been self-made. And so, but I'm one of those people of whenever I devote myself to something, and when I give all of me,
Mm.
I know that there might be people with more connections than me. There might be people with more experience than me. There might be people like, who have more money than me. Might be more people who have more privilege than me. But my work ethic and willingness to do whatever it takes as far as like, going to certain places or, doing the work, staying up all night and, doing my editing, doing the writing, that's what separates the good from the great. I'm no stranger. I might be new to wrestling media to a certain extent, but I'm not a stranger to hard work. And also like I've done plenty of media stuff and like other roles. And like I said, I've been in leadership just about my entire life. So it feels like I'm just answering my calling in a
Mm.
sense.
I know
And it's bigger than I ever thought.
you talked about your work ethic and stuff like that. What do you do on where does that work at? How? Let me start that question again. My brain
Yeah.
just sort of ping ponged there. Let me start that question again. When it comes to your work ethic and stuff like that, what what do you do to maintain that, but also make sure that Lyric is still a wrestling fan? Like, how do you make sure you don't get burned out on wrestling, but still enjoy it at the same time?
I'm still finding that balance, honestly. It was a lot easier to love wrestling when I first got back into it, like around 2022, and nobody knew who I was. And
Mm.
not saying that I'm famous or anything, but when my wrestling account first started in 2022, I ended the year with like 100 followers, if that.
Mm.
Now I have like 3,500. And so it's like, and some occasionally like tweets go viral and stuff like that. And so it's a lot more opinions. I think like the opinions, like the actual wrestling has been fantastic. I've enjoyed everywhere that I've gone, everything I've experienced. But especially as a Black woman in this industry, young Black woman, very opinionated one at that. And I don't tap to the beat of anybody else's drum. I realized that that might make some people uncomfortable. And so, like, having to deal with, like, I think the internet grifters, that's what makes things occasionally tough. Like, the work itself, that doesn't really burn me out. Except for recently, I will say, coming back from Tokyo, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much to write and edit, but I love the grind. I love like being in that. But yeah, as a wrestling fan, Japanese wrestling has helped so much. Like I think that that Puro block for me, and a lot of Western fans talk about it, like between 2 a.m. and like 6 a.m. when you're watching like the shows and all the grifters are asleep, it's the most Twitter is the purest place on earth. It's the
Mm,
purest place on earth to watch wrestling. And I try to bottle that feeling up as much as I can of how I feel. And also like building community via wrestling of has helped me to, keep my head a lot just because meeting so many great friends of just like, so even if I'm not excited for this trip right now, or I'm not excited for this show right now, I know I'm going to see my friends or like building community with other young women has been like absolutely awesome, and like meeting people literally all over the world has been awesome, and also just being completely honest with myself of knowing that, hey, I've suffered with depression, anxiety in the past, so
mm,
I still regularly go to therapy, and I regularly, take my medicine, and I am, really intentional about realizing what I can and can't do. Like even like the first week from Japan coming back, I thought that, oh yeah, I'm just going to get off the plane and I'm going to do all this writing and everything's going to be done. Like I'm dead exhausted. And just listening to my body and saying, hey, take this day, take these days,
mm,
rest. The work will be there. Um, and so yeah, just being a lot more honest with myself about what I can and can't handle. And also just stop being online. I will say, just stepping back sometimes is just the best thing of just and doing other stuff. Like last year, one of my greatest accomplishments was going to see Janet Jackson in concert and
mm.
Beyonce. That's it. Yeah, I have the shirt on right now, actually.
Two
Um,
dope concerts by the sound of things.
I'm I'm a pretty big concert girl. Only went to two last year. The best two you could possibly go to, but yeah, I'm typically a big concert girl.
That's very cool. So, how do you? That's very interesting. You talk about being a big concert fan and things like that. How do you switch off when you know you're going to a concert, but there's a chance that big news might break while you're there? How do you sort of get yourself in that mindset to switch off, to go to a concert, to do something else without feeling that almost, I don't want to say FOMO, but do you know what I mean? If you miss like a scoop or something.
Well, one, I'm not a scoopster. I keep up with like the stuff, but like I have no intentions of being a scoopster. I don't want to like the thought of being the person to have to break breaking news in this like internet wrestling community, absolutely not. It makes me so anxious. Um, but two, like I said, I don't ever since like the wrestling life has picked up, I feel like that's where I used to like travel for concerts and festivals a lot. I don't get to do it as much more because I'm always trying to go to wrestling shows. But like the ones that I did get to go to, like I remember going to DC because that's where I saw Beyonce at the Rain show on the Renaissance tour with one of my best friends from high school. And like that's the cool thing about like, I have my friends we don't all live in the same place anymore. But when we do get together, like these are people who have known me literally since I was like would wear those crappy wrestling t-shirts from Walmart and bring the crappy title belt to school. Like they've known me for so long. And so one, they what I'm doing now is completely normal to them. And then two, they also don't care about like
Mm,
this wrestling stuff, like only to a certain extent. Of course, they support me, but that's about it. So it's really great to like make that separation. But also like I'm that person of I'll go out and around 2 a.m. It's so funny because I remember my friends went out on Saturday night that weekend because the show was on a Sunday. I just tapped out. I couldn't do it. I was so tired. They
mm.
come back at like 3 a.m. I'm watching Pro Wrestling Noah. I'm like, well, it's a show happening right now. I have two screens up watching Noah and New Japan at the same time because like I don't really plan to do anything like that, stuff like that as a content creator. It's just me being like a silly old fan. Like I just love it. Like whenever I get a chance, like even if I'm out of town, like if I can catch the wrestling, I will. But I try not to like force myself to watch it as far as like a scoop or anything because I want to give the people in my life who are always there for me, wrestling or no wrestling, I want to give them my full attention and make
Yeah,
the be present in the moment because those are the moments that matter.
that's very, very cool. Almost after that deep conversation, I don't want to go on to this next bit, but I feel like we have to,
For
which
sure.
is how did you then start your podcast and how do you connect with Body Slam to do the Dynamite recap?
Yeah, so I I got to I started my podcast as soon as I came back from London. So I was on spring break, March 3rd through what was that, 12th in 2023. I just felt so inspired. I felt so inspired. I went to my first Rev Pro show. I had done a whole bunch of other things. Like I did, like my first trip to London last year was strictly as just a fan. I hadn't been doing no content
Was this
creating.
for All In? This wasn't for All In, no?
No, it wasn't for All In. It was a few months before All In. And so
Ah,
I went to London twice last year because my best friend from college, she was a student. Was a grad student at the London School of Economics. So she was staying in London for a year. And so I finally had a reason to go to London. I dreamed about it my entire life. Huge Doctor Who fan here, huge Harry Potter fan, huge Sherlock fan. I was like the crowd fan, you name it. I loved it. So when I went to the UK that first time, I did all of the things. So I went to Warner Brothers Harry Potter Studios. I went to 221 Baker Street, the Sherlock Holmes Museum. I went to the what is it, Madame Tussauds, the Wax Museum. I went to all of these different sites. I went and found a TARDIS from Doctor Who. Like I went and I did all the sites of like reliving my childhood because like I said, as far as me being an overachiever and everything, my childhood wasn't fun a lot. I
mm,
was always feeling like I always had to be super mature and always had to I didn't really get to have a lot of fun. So and also like I said, I grew up poor. So finally being able to do some of the things, and don't get me wrong, I'm still poor, but like I'm just irresponsible now. And so being able to do like some of the things that I've always wanted to do, that was super cool. And I remember I came home and I said, I think I'm going to give this podcasting thing a try. So I stewed on the name for a while and I said, I wanted to do something with the name Graps. And I travel a lot. And I remember, I think Keeks from Ollie Keeks, she had said something about like, you should really talk about like your travels are at least like all these places that, these different styles of wrestling you're covering because a lot of the stuff you're talking about, nobody else is talking about. So I was just stewing with it around maps and graps. And then I remember I reached out to a friend from college. I said, hey, can you come take some pictures of me? Uh, I kind of like had it in my mind of like the branding and layout that I wanted to go with. And that's also a thing about me too, of just everything I felt was preparing me because a part of the politics and leadership, there's a lot about branding, a lot about PR, a lot of
mm.
like learning how to use Canva, learning how to use like all these different tools, learning how to record. I was a big podcaster in high school. Like, so I launched the first Black woman ran podcast on our student media network and ended up becoming the first sponsored podcast we ever did at the University of South Carolina. And so I knew I had podcast experience. I knew I had a creative eye. That year, I also was the producer on an internationally acclaimed film that I worked on. And we showed the film in London while I was there. It's called The Backbone, which was about the history of Black women at the University of South Carolina post desegregation with one of my best friends. And I had the tools, so it was just like, okay, apply these tools to wrestling. And so
Mm.
that's basically what kind of happened. And so I knew how to kind of like do the podcast thing. So yeah, I just kind of got started DMing a few places like, hey, like I would love to write for you or, different stuff. And I in the black and not in the black, but in like the wrestling media world, I'm kind of like a unicorn. Just
Mm,
in the sense of I'm a black girl who covers like the most niche brands and stuff like that, and writing and podcasting and hosting. There isn't really anybody like me. I want there to be more people like me, and that's the goal eventually, obviously. But in a lot of ways, I'm a unicorn. But yeah, once I got started, kind of had a vision of where I wanted to go. I didn't even imagine that I would be like doing like credentialed work or stuff this early because I didn't even get started for real until April.
mm,
So like, yeah, so we're looking at about 9 months in officially. 9 months.
mm. I understand what you're saying there completely. So you talk about being 9 months in there. Where do you want to be in 9 months' time? You talked about everything you've done so far, but where do you want to be in sort of like 9 months' time before we get into your dynamite recap?
So some of that I can share because I some goals I don't want to put out into the world yet. But like I said, I want to get stronger with my Japanese. That is
Mm,
something that I think is really huge, and I think that is really important. And I think that will continue to set me apart going forward. And I would love, a paid gig. Like I would love a paid gig. And not even specifically for a wrestling company. It could be anything I think wrestling related. Like I don't want to do media forever. Like I would love to do like something more creative, more production oriented. I would love to also just kind of like try a lot of different things and see if I like it. But yeah, I think working on my Japanese, and then securing a paid gig, a steady paid gig, would be the top two things that I want to accomplish going forward.
that's very, very cool. So then, how does you doing the Body Slam recap come about, and how do you connect with your co-host?
Yeah, so I remember SP3 had reached out to me to do what show was that? It wasn't Power Struggle, but it was one of the New Japan shows to come on and like do a recap with him, and we hit it off. It was great. And then there was another one, and I think and he asked me to come in and do that, and I thought it was great. And then he reached out to me on the DM, said, "Hey, I'm the new media manager over at Body Slam." That was after I and a lot of other women had left a site that shall no longer be named, but we all became free agents around the same time. And
Mm,
he was like, "Hey, like I just became media manager at Body Slam. I would love to help platform you for one of our AEW shows, as well as let me know of like the other women from Women's Wrestling Talk." And so that's why a lot of other women have started doing a lot of the post shows as well, specifically for the NXT post show, the Collision post show. Were some of my former colleagues, really great people. But yeah, so he asked me about which one I want to do. I said, well, Dynamite sounds cool. And I remember I reached out to Lo from Wrestling Wind Down. I was like, hey, are you in this? And she was like, yeah.
mm.
And we really just started thinking about, okay, what do we want this to look like? And we came up with the Dynamite book. And, SP3 and later Cassidy, they were really kind of on board with like, everything that we suggested, really wanted us to kind of like take the reins. And so, yeah, it's been really cool. I've been, the show's been on hiatus, obviously for the holidays, but we'll be back this week. Super excited to see how that shapes up because um Dynamite has been pretty interesting lately with the Continental Classic and everything. And
Mm.
so we're on the road to Revolution. So yeah, that's really how the Body Slam pairing came together.
How did you know that, like, when you and Lo started podcasting, how did you know this would make a good podcast rather than, and this always sounds really bad, but I know what I mean by this question. We are just two friends talking. How did you know this would make a good podcast in that sort of sense?
I think that two friends talking isn't a bad thing.
Mm,
Well, isn't always a bad thing. And I think especially the perspective of having like two Black women talking about AEW, for a brand's podcast. Like a lot of people aren't doing that. Like
Mm.
it just aren't doing that. So that's a perspective that, a lot of people just typically don't have. And then like, also, I really respect her, and I a lot of people, there's a lot of content creators in this space, and I think like we'd all be lying if we said we listened to all of them, even our friends.
Yeah.
But she's a person I actually listen to. Like, like I'm a fan of her. So, and she's a fan of me. And so I always think that when, like I said, when you really like something, like it typically comes together well. Like in wrestling, I think you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
Yeah, I
And
know
so,
what you mean.
yeah, so it was just a really great vibe. So yeah, she's actually no longer on the show just because of schedule changes. Over winter break, just schedule changes, but she's still my girl. She's great. And so yeah, I'll be popping out maybe with a new co-host, probably some guests in
Mhm.
upcoming weeks. While I mm, get down with a new co-host, but like I would love, and hopefully we'll get me and Loa get to work together again. She's great.
That's very, very cool. You talked about podcasting with SP3 there, and I believe he is one of the greatest podcasters currently in this space. I don't know if you agree with me on that. Like,
Yeah, he's awesome, man.
yeah. So, is there anything SP3 has taught you when it comes to podcasting?
Um, I would say really energy of just like, whether you're tired, if you're going to do this every week, like you have to really come with the energy. Like you really have to like be upbeat, like you have to have that energy. And that's something that I will say I struggle with at times. Especially
Preach. Particularly as I'm in the UK, I do struggle sometimes because it's like it's
yeah.
8 o'clock at night as we record this. It's like I've had a full day already. I'm tired.
Yeah, I can only imagine those time changes are insane. And so, yeah, I think energy is just super important of like maintaining that energy because like as content creators, it truly never stops. And like even like for something like I was like, oh, my Tokyo trip, I was I feel like I got to enjoy it. And then I came home and I'm just like, oh, now I got to turn this all into content. Now I got to schedule it all out. Now I got to do this. And it's just because like sometimes it becomes burdensome, just to be quite
Mm,
honest, especially like when you're a wrestling fan, you're at this wild show and you're trying to remind yourself to write things down or record certain things. And whole time you just want to lose it. Like
mm,
Wrestle Dream, I remember I was there. I could have gone home so happy afterwards. Then I remember like I had the scrum afterwards and like just having to constantly
mm,
be on it with questions because like I'm terrible about this, but I don't write questions down.
mm.
Um,
I don't
I
either. This is all
I
off the top of my head, by the way.
very off the top of my head. But I've always, like I said, I come from a background of public speaking. I also come from a background of, music. So improv is, and having to think quickly on your feet is a huge part of my name is a lyric, so finding words has typically come to me with a fair amount of ease.
Mm.
So yeah, that's
I know what you mean completely there. What do you do? I know we talked about this a little bit, but what do you do on the days that you're like so burned out, but need to get this content out? How do you keep yourself motivated?
this is not a good idea, but I literally stare at the computer until my body forces me to do something. Sometimes I'll fall asleep on it. Sometimes, like, I'll actually do it. But I literally just have to force myself. And but also one thing that I do is if I realize that nothing's coming out brain wise, for a while, I go and I look at things that I either step back from wrestling. So I'll watch something non wrestling related. Typically it is I watch Doctor Who reruns. Um, or I've recently gotten into The Bear, I think it's a fantastic show.
Mm,
Uh, and different stuff like that. Or I'll go back and I'll watch wrestling that inspires me.
Ah,
And so like I'll run one of my old favorites, I'll run back a classic, um, lots of old Noah, lots of old New Japan, some, older AEW. I'll go back and I'll watch stuff that inspires me and hope that that really like trickles some creative output. And so typically that'll work eventually. So one of those things will work.
that's very, very cool. As we look at wrapping this up, because believe it or not, we've been going for almost an hour, and I do want to be respectful of your time. We are
Oh,
going
good.
to do a segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay per view, favorite wrestler's entrance team, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically, the questions that I assume Lyric gets asked on social media. So now she'll have a place to be like, God, I have answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
Ooh, I'm gonna go with Shibata versus Okada, Sakura Genesis.
Why does that one speak to you?
I was so like I said, I was so depressed at the time. I watched it for the first time in 2022. So depressed at the time, and I remember I felt numb in life, and I just needed to feel something. And that performance by Shibata is so gutsy. It's so intense. It's so real. Like he wrestled an absolute perfect match. Like the intensity, the sweat literally rolling off of his body. I had never seen anything like it. Like that type of passion, you could feel like his passion for everything. Down to the world's wildest headbutt. Um, it was just that performance. It sticks with me. I have some other like my favorite match. Sometimes it typically like hops between that and the
Yeah.
Osprey Omega match, but that's really the main one for me.
What about your favorite overall pay per view? When I say pay per view, I mean Double or Nothing 2019, for example.
Gotcha. I'm going to just go off Forbidden Door 1 for
Oh, yeah.
was special to me. Like so special to me as a wrestling fan. Like I feel like it opened up a lot of possibilities of what this could be. At least for me, like coming up as somebody like post WCW folding, and I've never really seen like a lot of different, promotions work together or anything like that. Forbidden Door 2022 changed my life for
Mm.
sure.
Well, you talked about a little bit why, but just for the content's sake, why does that pay per view speak to you so much?
It's just, yeah, it's so special of just, and also the fact that half the roster was injured, and so many of those matches came together like last minute and are just like the craziest smorgasbord of just excellence. Like Will Ospreay versus Orange Cassidy will forever be ingrained in my mind. Bullet Club versus dudes with attitudes, like the energy. John Moxley and Tanahashi, like the energy,
Oh, yeah.
nothing will ever be like it. And just, I think it gave wrestling fans something new to aspire for. Of
Mm.
you don't just have to wait for. Hopefully, you will hoping somebody quits some promotion and comes to your favorite collaboration. I think is the best for everybody, and so I think
Mm.
that it changed how we can think about things in wrestling. So that's it for me.
Ah, I understand what you're saying. What about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme?
Oh, oh, this is hard. My favorite wrestler's entrance theme. I don't know, but I think that because I actually no, I know right now, Kento Miyahara's entrance is
Mm.
the most electrifying thing. And because I've now seen it live, I can attest it is the greatest thing. And is his entrance doesn't have any words, but the way that he commands the crowd like a conductor and like Kento, and then the music cuts out and Kento, Kento, Miyahara, Kento. Literally, it's like he thrives off of the best example of it. If you watch Noah One Night Dream from 2023, his entrance in Korakuen Hall versus before he faces Katsuhiko Nakajima. Perfect. So right now, yeah, Kento Miyahara's entrance is everything for me.
What about your favorite tag team?
Oh, so many. And you mean of all time or right now?
Do all time, and then we can do right now
Okay.
after because I have a segment for that.
Okay. I'm gonna go with the Young Bucks.
That's your all-time one, yeah?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Young Bucks.
Why do they speak to you as a fan?
I love people who do things their way. I love people who challenge the status quo. I love people who go and don't do things like everybody else. And I think the Young Bucks have epitomized that. And also like their match catalog is freaking insane.
Mm.
Every all we look back at a lot of the greatest tag teams, specifically of this generation. Young Bucks have faced them and has been their best opponents 9 times out of 10. And yeah, and the way that they changed the game for independent wrestlers and for people to be able to find jobs, I think that wrestling is so important, like so much past the wrestling of being able to provide community and sustenance for other people. I think is just so underrated. And so yeah, I'm gonna go with the Bucks.
And then what about your current one?
Current favorite wrestler?
Current favorite tag team?
Current favorite tag team? Oh, I really, really love the Saito brothers in All Japan. I love those
Ooh.
guys. Love those guys. They're not as experienced as some other teams. Like, of course, like there's some other teams that I love, but like right now, I think especially recency bias because I finally got to see them in person. Got to see them in person twice. Super excited. But the Saito brothers, I think that they're so special. They're in their late 30s. They just started wrestling like 2 years ago. They come from a sumo and American football background. They're
Oh
half
wow.
American, half Japanese. They're like these, you have June, who's like this just smooth guy with the beautiful hair and like really big on like you could tell like slender, and then you'll have Ray who's this big bruiser type, like reminds you almost like a Bruiser Brody. They remind you, and they come out to Dream Warriors by Dawkins,
Ooh.
and
I'm
they just
looking these guys up once we finish. I'm not gonna
yes, when they come out you feel like they make you feel like when you watch like old footage of like that 90s All Japan, these big tag teams, like, or 80s All Japan, Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody types, like these big guys, Jumbo Saruta, like these huge bruiser guys. They give me those all of those type of vibes. So yeah, I'm going with the Saito brothers.
So, what I like to do when someone gives me their all time and their favorite tag team, their current favorite, is we fantasy book this lyric. Where is the Saito brothers versus the Young Bucks taking place? What's the stipulation? Who's going over, etc.
Oh, I don't think there needs to be a stipulation. I would love to see it happen. I would love to see AEW do a super show in Japan with all their partners. And I think that Saito Brothers versus Young Bucks would be awesome. I think that the Bucks, if it happens in the next 2 years, the Bucks go over. If it happens later than that, I think the Saitos go over. But I don't think it really matters who goes over.
Time
Um,
limit draw, maybe, if there's time
hey,
limits.
maybe it's a time limit draw, but yeah, so that's how I would book it. Um, I think seeing the Bucks move with some bigger guys could be a really fun challenge. And I think also seeing the Saitos move with some smaller guys could be a really cool challenge as well. Um, and also I think that they're just missing that one signature match versus like, a global talent. Same thing like Will Ospreay before Kenny Omega. He was always
Yeah,
great. But that one match catapulted him. Zack Sabre Jr. versus Bryan Danielson. That's the same type of thing. So I think that Saito brothers, they're just one match away from their everybody knowing who they are.
that's very, very cool. And then as we wrap this up, lyric, the biggest generic question, in my opinion, Who is your favorite overall wrestler of all time?
Um, I have to say two, a man and a woman, and I'm going to go with Kenny Omega and Mercedes Moné.
Why do they speak to you as a fan?
Kenny, much like for the Bucks, he always does things his own way. When I watch him, his best matches, it feels like Andrea Bocelli singing.
Mm,
Like it's just like this beautiful opera. Like his matches could move me to tears. His commanding over storytelling is absolutely brilliant. His commanding over his body, his athleticism is absolutely brilliant. And also I think that like he just does he's just been so influential, and he's one of the last world beaters as people who has tried literally said, to be the best in the world, I have to go to every wrestling market, try every style, and conquer every style. And that's essentially what he's done. And he's just amazing. And I think he's so creative. I think the way that he thinks, his penchant for long-term storytelling across years and different promotions is absolutely exquisite. And then for Mercedes Moné, I'm not sure if I would still be a wrestling fan without her. Like
ooh,
when I go back to the high school days, like I said, I was involved in a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff. So like watching Raw and SmackDown regularly on Monday and Friday nights, especially Friday nights, once I started getting marching band, because we have football games and we have
mm,
competitions and stuff like that, got really hard. But her stint in NXT, it stopped me. Like it really like made me pause and just like, okay, whatever she's doing, I'm doing. I remember, so I would pull my little monies together and buy that legit boss t-shirt off of offline, and I would watch everything. NXT Takeover Brooklyn. I remember the way that I felt. I remember the way that the air felt of just watching that from home and thinking like, wow, I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime of from women's wrestling. And this could be so much more. And I just for me, she was the best representation of, I think, of Black womanhood I had ever seen up until that point. Uh, for me, my generation of wrestling.
mm.
I had seen some things while I was in, like, while I was a TNA fan. I'd seen Miss Jackie Moore, I'd seen Awesome Kong, but I had never really seen a women's wrestling golden era. So like I kind of, what the four horsewomen in NXT were doing at that time, like I fully bought into it. Mercedes was obviously my favorite and still is. Um, and everywhere that she goes, I will follow her, but specifically when she bet on herself for Wrestle Kingdom and New Japan and calls her shot, it made me call my shot too. Like
Yeah,
when I saw her bet on herself and say, hey, this industry, like the Puro industry, has not seen a high-ranking Black woman since probably Aja Kong, and says, I'm going to come here and I'm going to turn all this upside down, and I'm going to redefine what success can look like in professional wrestling. I'm going to define my own success. And that really spoke to me, and it really continues to speak to me and continues to inspire me. And also, she's the greatest North American wrestler, a women's wrestler of all time, and her match catalog um is exquisite.
mm.
Exquisite. Those are my two.
That's very, very cool. I don't feel comfortable personally doing the fantasy booking question on that list, but that is just me and my little brain. If anyone comes at me for that, fair enough. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely understood.
So, as we wrap this up, Lyric, obviously, I want to say thank you for a great conversation. Thank you for coming on. But the question I end this show on is I believe as content creators, we're sort of going to live forever in some sort of very strange way, if you think about the word. So, what is one piece of content you're like, I'd like to be remembered for that? And one that you're like, yuck, please don't remember me for that.
um, I think the article that I wrote about Black wrestlers in New Japan, highlighting the work that they were doing in 2023. And it came out in Monthly Pure So magazine. I'm really proud of that, just because of like the impact that it had on like the actual wrestlers and people who have read it, and just like really exposing a space and audience of to wrestling that I think doesn't always intersect. I'm really proud of that one. I'm proud of the Marufuji 25th anniversary article I wrote too. But what I'm not proud of is when I first started, I was doing these terrible unboxing videos of like my pro wrestling crates and stuff, and like I think I archived half of them on my own YouTube. Just
Unlisted sort of thing.
yeah, like they're just so awkward. And I'm still trying to get natural with like the lifestyle type content. I could talk about wrestling all day, but all the other stuff, I get a little bit awkward. I'm not gonna lie.
Hmm.
So yeah, I hate those were rough. Those early videos were rough.
That's very, very cool. So as we wrap this up, Lyric, honestly, I want to say thank you for a great conversation. But promote yourself, please. Where can the good people find you, your content, etc.?
You can find me at Lyric Wrestling on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch. And you can find me at Lyric Swinton on YouTube. And please subscribe. Fun stuff is there. Vlog from my Tokyo trip, part one, went up earlier. And yeah, I post about like what I'm writing, what I'm doing, and subscribe to the Maps and Graps podcast, all out on all podcast platforms. Um, and yeah, if you see me at a show, please don't be a stranger. Come say hi. It's going to be a really big year. Hopefully, I can get back to England over the summer for All In 2. That'll be exciting.
That's very, very cool. So if you guys like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Flourish on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter or X at Tom Talk Flourish, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.